So, welcome to my Gracie Combatives 2.0 test. For those who don't know, Gracie Combatives is a self-defense course based around the 36 most important and fundamental techniques of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's designed to take someone like myself, a person with no experience fighting and who is not particularly strong or athletic, and give them the tools and techniques to defend themselves against a bigger and stronger opponent. The test is divided into 5 sections and takes about half an hour to complete. So if you just want to see the test itself, then of course, feel free to skip ahead. I've also made a separate review video of Gracie Combatives, which you can find on my channel. This test is the culmination of around 110 hours of training over almost exactly 8 months. Last year, I did a trial week at this training center on a whim, just to see what it would be like. And here we are almost a year later, and I'm still going with it. As has often been the case with many of the other skills that I've tried to learn over the years, my progress with Jiu-Jitsu in the beginning stages was very slow. Surprisingly, I found the process of learning Jiu-Jitsu much more mentally taxing than physically taxing. It took quite a few months for my brain to adjust to thinking in a completely different, three-dimensional space. I should say from the outset that if you're wanting to know how to perform these techniques perfectly, or if you're looking for a video to use as a reference, then this is not the right video for that. As you'll see, I do end up passing the test, but I make a bunch of mistakes along the way. This channel is all about learning, and I want to show my learning projects at all stages: beginner, intermediate, advanced, and expert. With Jiu-Jitsu, I'm definitely a beginner. And now we're about to start. So the first thing I need to do is say my name in front of the camera, because this video will be sent to headquarters in America for official verification. So we're starting with escapes from underneath mount, a really important skill to have in a real street situation. Basically, someone is on top of you, potentially ground and pounding you. How do you get them off? You can see with this punch block variation that I'm protecting my head, and after we roll over, I control my opponent's arms. So these little slaps to the shoulders that you can see are supposed to imitate slapping someone's head. The only reason you would slap your opponent in the head is to get them to put their arms out in front of them, which allows you to attack one of them. As you can see, we learn a standard technique, and then we learn a number of variations that might be needed depending on the situation. So here we have a different variation of the Americana arm lock. It's a pretty brutal submission. You can basically destroy someone's shoulder with this move. Elbow escapes from mount. This is the other main way to escape from under someone's mount. There are actually 4 different variations of this move that we need to learn. I think I actually get confused here and take a bit too long to do one of the techniques. I may have lost a point for that. By the way, a big thank you to everyone who has subscribed in the last couple of weeks. Just a month ago, I had only a handful of subscribers, and all of a sudden I have more than 3,000. So I really appreciate it, and it definitely motivates me to make more content. A couple of weeks ago, I released a video which was basically like a comedy sketch poking fun at German grammar, and it's had over 400,000 views at this point, which I just find hard to believe. When I first started learning these positional controls, I found them quite boring and I wasn't super motivated to really learn them. But if you think about it, they're really useful and foundational techniques. If you can get on top of someone and hold that position for a couple of minutes, they're going to burn up all their energy trying to escape. More and more, I'm learning that Jiu-Jitsu is about control rather than flashy moves. Although there is a time and a place for flashy moves. From mount position, it's also very easy to transition to back mount. And here we have a rear naked choke, a very simple and powerful way to end a fight. What I like about these submissions is that you can learn them very quickly, but they work at all levels. Even in the highest levels of the UFC, you'll see people finish by rear naked chokes all the time. Here we have a different rear naked choke, this time on the weak side. So you have to reach across, grab their shoulder and lift it to create space for your other arm to sneak through. Headlock counter to armbar. In case you're familiar with the movie Lethal Weapon, in the fight between Riggs and Mr. Joshua, Riggs goes for this exact move, but he doesn't quite get it. That movie was really ahead of its time in terms of showing jiu-jitsu in a real fight. It's hard to believe that that came out, I think it was in the 80s. Here we have a standard armbar or straight arm lock from mount. I've really had to work on getting my balance right and leaning to my right when I do this move. I really like this twisting arm control technique. It allows you to control someone bigger and stronger for an extended period of time. For example, if you were waiting for the police to arrive. It's also easy to transition from this position to either back mount or a straight arm lock. And that's the end of part 1. So now we're in part 2, guard techniques. What you're seeing here is the punch block series. It's a series of techniques to defend yourself from punches in different closed and open guard positions. Keith has his hands up like this to give me a target to aim at. Obviously, you're not going to kick your partner in the head during training, okay? But it's training for an up kick, which in real life is a very, very powerful technique. Now we have a bunch of sweeps. So once again, we have a standard technique and then several variations of that technique. In sport jiu-jitsu, it's quite common to stay on your back and attack from there, but in Gracie Combatives, I think the priority is on sweeping and then establishing a dominant position where you're on top. It's just a better strategy for street fights. That was a very slow get up from me just then. You know, it's funny, in my head, I feel like I'm moving fast, but then I watch a video of myself and it looks like I'm moving like an old man. So hopefully in a real life situation, I would move a bit faster. So this is a hook sweep, very useful technique and very easy to set up. I've used it with success while sparring a couple of times. And now my personal favorite, the triangle choke. I don't have a whole lot of upper body strength, so any chance I have to choke someone out with my legs, I'll take it. Armbar from guard, two different variations. In the next variation, your opponent manages to pull their arm out. From here, it's very easy to transition into a triangle choke on the other side. Kimura from guard, another very brutal technique. This transition from guard to mount took me quite a bit of practice to get right. Basically, every technique you're seeing here today is a work in progress. So now we have a couple of guard passes. These days, a lot of people know some jiu-jitsu, so it's not inconceivable that you could end up in someone's closed guard in a street fight. You would hope that people who know jiu-jitsu aren't going around starting fights, but it's better to be prepared. I actually go for the elbow strike too early here, so you're supposed to establish your posture first and then do the elbow strike. The purpose of this strike with the elbow to the head is to get your opponent to separate their feet or separate their legs. so that you can then pass the guard. And that's the end of part 2. Okay, part 3, side mount. Starting with some very important positional controls. Here we have a bunch of escapes from side mount. I feel like I really need to practice these more, especially on my weak side. Actually, I need to practice everything more. In this rider variation, you trap your opponent's arms so they can't punch you. Then you wait for them to get bored, and then when they posture up, you escape. Now on to headlock escapes, a very important series of techniques for real life. Whenever there was a fight in primary school or high school when I was growing up, it always seemed to end with some kind of headlock. This scissors choke is particularly brutal. You're basically crushing someone's neck between your legs. I wish I'd known about these moves when I was a kid and the school bully was attacking me. Would have come in handy. In this variation of the headlock escape, you need to move your opponent's leg out of the way by pushing it down with your own leg. I think I momentarily forget what to do here, and as a result, I lose a point. And that's part 3 side mount done. So it's time for some clinches and takedowns. Now this leg hook takedown is not great. You're supposed to actually pick the leg up and move it out and away from your opponent's body. So I think I lose a point here for not doing that. It feels counterintuitive, but running into an attack and grabbing a hold of your opponent is actually one of the safer options in a real-life confrontation. You either want to be in very close, in a clinch, or further than 2 arms distance away. You can see that I'm performing a number of different takedowns here. For some reason I hesitate here and I ask Keith to tell me the technique again. I don't know why I'm confused, given that there's only one possible combatives technique from this position. When I first started training last year, out of all the techniques in the program, the takedowns were the most challenging to learn. I was very tentative when I first tried them because I have a bit of a fear of getting injured, not to mention some past injuries. So I practiced them very slowly in the beginning. Over time, I became more confident with them, and now I'd say that they almost feel natural. Guillotine choke from standing. This is not my best technique and I really need to practice this one more. In particular, getting the finish. Standing arm lock. I think this is a really underrated technique. And now we have a series of standing headlock escapes. Again, very important techniques to know for real life. This particular technique that you're seeing here was one of the most awkward to learn in the beginning, but I do feel confident with it now. You just have to make sure that the other person doesn't land on you.
Excellent. That's it. Nice, Dan. Excellent. Oh, even worse. Go for it. Boom. That's worse for me. Nice. Perfect. Excellent. Nice.
And that's part 4 done. The fifth and final part of this test is the full fight simulation. For 4 minutes, Keith will throw a bunch of different attacks at me, and using everything that I've learned over the last 8 months, I have to respond to each attack using an appropriate technique. There is some flexibility here. What's important is that I maintain control of the exchange and transition to techniques and positions that work. The priority is defending yourself, so protecting your head and making sure that you take as little damage as possible. Then closing the distance, obtaining a dominant position, controlling that position, and once you have control, applying a submission to end the fight. So let's see how I go. We're about to start. Okay, so I've got my hands up and I immediately step in for a clinch. Leg hook takedown. This one's a bit better than the one I did earlier. I establish control of the mount position. So now I'm trying to control the arm and go for an Americana, but Keith's fighting it a lot, and now he turns onto his side. But it's the side I'm not used to because for 8 months we've been training on the other side. So somehow I end up in a weak side armbar that I might have practiced maybe once or twice in 8 months. Very sloppy. So now Keith throws a haymaker at me, so I duck under, grab a hold of him and do a rear takedown. Keith grabs me in a headlock, but then we transition to rear mount and a weak side rear naked choke. Next, I start from under mount. I tried to do a trap and roll, but Keith is very heavy on his arms. So eventually I figure out that I'm supposed to do an elbow escape. I block some punches using stage 2 defense, and then I finish with one of my favorite techniques, a triangle choke. Yeah, some truly Oscar-worthy acting here from Keith. So I run in again, and this time I pull guard. Stage 4 punch defense. Hook sweep. I get up and establish control of side mount. I transition to mount and finish the fight with a standard Americana.
Yeah, nice. 1, 2. Alright, let's fall over quick.
For the final part of the test, I'm underneath side control. Keith headlocks me, so I do a frame escape, and I finish the fight with a scissors choke.
Excellent. Now follow up. Nice. Excellent. And back to your feet.
And that's the end of the test. So I hope you found this video informative and maybe even interesting. You can see that I have a base level of skill now with these 36 techniques, and my medium to long-term goal is to become a black belt in combatives. I want to be able to execute these techniques perfectly on both sides while under pressure. You can never be too skillful or too prepared. As I mentioned earlier, I have an in-depth review video of Gracie Combatives where I talk about the course in a lot more detail, so feel free to check that out. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.